book, interventions of the U.S. Throughout the world, Afghanistan, Syria. Can you talk about, here we have a situation where less than about 6 months after the U.S. exit from Afghanistan and supposedly the end of our forever wars, we're embroiled now in the funding and financing of yet another conflict that is shaking the world. Most Americans don't realize most of this aid money is only going to buy weapons from the U.S. war industry. And of course, we have on the horizon the next conflict with China. Talk about this forever war mentality of the United States and the influence of the Pentagon on how the media portrays many of these conflicts.
One, let's just look at some numbers first. Last year, the calculation was that the world's powers spend $2 trillion, that's with a T, on weapons. The United States by itself spends nearly $1 trillion. If you add the money in the Department of Energy budget for nuclear weapons and so on, $1 trillion, $2 trillion globally. Meanwhile, the total budget for the United Nations is $3 billion. That's with a B. We spend trillions of dollars on weapons and only low billions on peace building. It's extraordinary. I mean, I want more people to know about these numbers. There's a habit of war making. Look, you can't take out Ukraine, lift it out of the earth and put it in Iowa. Ukraine is going to have to live next to Russia. It's going to have to live there. That's where it is. The Ukrainians and the Russians have to come to some kind of agreement. The kind of way in which the rhetoric in this war has accelerated, going back to 2014, that rhetorical acceleration is something that even the Ukrainians rejected when Volodymyr Zelensky came before them in the election, because after all, Mr. Zelensky came to office vowing to make a peace agreement with the Russians, because even he recognizes Ukraine has to live next to Russia. But the United States saw Ukraine as a kind of loose nail under which they placed their weapons. Billions of dollars of weapons, much more than the annual budget of the United Nations, in order to egg Russia on. And by the way, it's not just a matter of Ukraine and Russia coming to some understanding, because they do have to live next to each other. And as Noam was saying, in April of this year, they had an interim agreement which looked a lot like Minsk II. But the West said no. The point, as U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said, is to weaken Russia. You see, the question isn't Ukraine and Russia by itself. It's also the United States and Russia. So when the United States withdrew from the Intermediate Nuclear Force Range Treaty in 2019, that was the end, basically, of most of the arms control treaties between the United States and Russia. In fact, since 2019, we're living without a security guarantee arrangement between these major nuclear powers, the United States and Russia. No wonder that the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has brought the doomsday clock to within 100 seconds of midnight. You know, it began at 7 minutes to midnight. We are now at 100 seconds. And the reason the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists gives for this is the unilateral withdrawal by the United States from basically the entire architecture of arms control with Russia in particular. So there's got to be pressure on the Biden administration, not only to back off and allow Zelensky and Putin to talk, to allow them to have some kind of peace agreement that's, with dignity for all sides, but also the United States needs to go back to the table with the Russians and talk to them. If the United States can talk to the Saudis, in fact, pal up with the Saudis, why can't they talk to the Russians? It's ridiculous to say, the Russians are not going to, they're not a good partner, they're not going to live on agreements and so on. Look who's talking. The United States is the country that unilaterally walked away from the Iran nuclear deal. Not the Iranians, it was the United States. It's a bit rum to now say that, well, the Russians are not a reliable negotiating partner. At least try it. For God's sake, for the sake of humanity, we need these major powers with a lot of firepower in their pocket to talk to each other. You can't turn to the United Nations and say, will you do something? As I said, the UN budget is $3 billion. You've got to strengthen peace building in the world and weaken war making. That has to be part of the commitment of sensitive people around the planet, whether in Russia, in Ukraine, the United States, certainly in the United Kingdom.
You both talk about allowing Russia